Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 121, and we are going to be talking about episodes 1 through 3, the first 3 episodes of Star Wars Andor, the new live-action Star Wars series on Disney Plus. And for that discussion, I have welcomed back on the show as my guest for this episode and also running the behind-the-scenes tech and stuff for this episode of Who's the Bossk. It's Rebekah Moseley, the co-founder of laughingplace.com. Rebekah, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. I feel like I'm still recovering from the D23
Yeah.
Expo. But yeah, no, doing well. Excited to talk to you about this series that I know has been eagerly awaited by so many. So yeah, can't wait to get through the I feel like I want to get through the headlines so we can discuss Andor.
I know. But first, I gotta talk to you first for a minute because I think we are all recovering from the D23 Expo. See, I'm still recovering from the D23 Expo, but I wanted to ask you if you had any personal highlights, any favorite parts, things you saw around the convention, things that maybe you heard about and didn't get to see in person. But what was the convention? What was D23 Expo like for you?
Well, I am famously queue avoidant, and so my D23 Expo experience is very different than the typical. I don't go to the very large panels. I don't get lined up for experiences or whatever. I kind of bop around here and there, and I very much, as always, enjoyed that kind of center stage that they had at the expo. They usually have it right there on the show floor. This year it was described as the Disney bundle stage, and I had the opportunity to see the cast of the Mysterious Benedict Society there, the cast of Big Shot, a wonderful kind of reunion of Kim Possible voice talents, but the highlight had to have been the Muppet Mayhem panel that was there, seeing the Muppets live, especially when Animal decided that he needed to play hide and seek in the midst of it and came and was like 3 people away from me, the Muppeteer and Animal himself, just, right there in the midst of us. Super, super fun, super exciting. Yeah, that was a highlight.
I'm so jealous of everyone who got to see the Muppets perform at D23 Expo. I've seen them before in person, so I can't really complain, and I got to do a lot of fun stuff. But if I had one thing that I could go back and do at the convention, it would be the Muppet stuff. But what about the stuff coming out of Lucasfilm, like the Lucasfilm panel and presentation? Did anything jump out at you coming out of that news?
I still haven't really caught up on all that, I'll be honest.
Okay.
So I'm still just a little bit behind. So I'll turn the tables and ask you what out of D23 has you particularly excited, Mike?
I think The Mandalorian season 3 is probably going to be really good. I think that show has proven itself to be pretty reliable. And then they didn't talk about it very much, but that Skeleton Crew Star Wars show. We don't know a whole lot about it, but I'm very, I find the idea of just kind of shifting the focus to new characters that we haven't met before and this little like low stakes adventure in the Star Wars galaxy. That's the kind of thing I'm hoping they do more of. So that I would say I am pretty psyched for. And then Rebekah is also the co-host of Barely Necessities, which is the live merchandise show on the Laughing Place YouTube channel. What's been going on with Barely Necessities lately? What kind of stuff have you guys been talking about?
Oh, okay. Well, actually, at the D23 Expo, I picked up my Ahsoka Tano Kyber crystal.
Nice.
I love that they went with the blue, which is based in the storyline where Anakin kind of tinkers with her sabers when she's gone, and she ends up with the blue. So there's something special about that particular part of the storyline. So I was happy they went with that first. They're going to eventually release the other colors, but yeah. So that was a lot of fun. Rock Love was there at the expo, so I had a chance to speak with the designer and founder of the company, and just one of those things where when you like a brand and then you meet kind of the people whose blood, sweat, and tears go into it, and you enjoy their company too, it makes it just that much more special. So there's that. But over at Shop Disney, they've got this new Tatooine cap. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of like a postcard. It says, welcome to Tatooine on it. And hey, I'll pull it up. I actually have it sitting
Okay,
right here, so I'll show
great.
it to you real quick. But it caught my eye, and so again, I highlight it here. It says, "Welcome to Tatooine, home of the twin suns." I like how it's kind of that sand color. And then
Sure.
they've also released this scarf, and it's also kind of that sand color. It's got some floral pattern looking on
Yeah.
it, but it's very subtle. And then woven and then kind of weaved within that design, you have a few X-wings.
X-wing
So
fighters. Yeah, that's
yeah,
pretty
so
good.
like I say, a subtle nod to your Star Wars love found within the scarf. So I know some of you are listening on a podcast, but yeah, the those two items are pretty cool. You can find them at Shop Disney, so be sure and check those out if you're needing to add to your Star Wars collection. But Mike, the
Okay.
Lola animatronic, more and
Oh,
more people have purchased it,
yeah.
and seeing people play with it, I am super. Oh, I'm so
And
jealous. It's
is
like,
yours on the way? Are you getting one of those?
oh,
It's on your wish list?
my fun money went to
Okay.
my beautiful necklace, so it'll have to wait a little
Okay.
while. But oh man, it is so much fun. I saw one of your previous guests was playing with it on her Twitter
Oh,
stream,
yeah.
and it was extremely. Her name escapes me.
Is that
She's a great.
Holly Fry?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, seeing her play with hers on Twitter made me
Yeah.
jealous.
So when does the next when does Barely Necessities happen? Is that tomorrow?
We are Tuesdays at
Oh,
4.
Tuesday. Sorry.
Yeah,
I should know
no,
this.
no, no, it's all good. Barely Necessities is Tuesday at 4. Our schedule got a little out of whack with the D23 Expo, but you find us right here Tuesdays at 4. We cover Disney merchandise, and we always have a segment specifically focused on Star Wars as well. So we do the grand Disney thing, and then a little bit of Marvel, a little bit of Star Wars. So there you go.
Okay, great. So that's Barely Necessities. Check that out on Laughing Place YouTube. We are going to talk about a few Star Wars headlines before we get into Andor. Just real quick, there's not a lot of news this week because we had a D23 Expo a couple weekends ago, and that ate up most of the news for a little while. But in addition to what we talked about on the last episode for D23 Expo, we have been getting a lot of casting news for Star Wars: The Acolyte, which is another upcoming live action Star Wars TV series coming to Disney Plus. It's set in the period before the prequel trilogy, and they are calling it part of the High Republic era. But I think it's at the very, very end of the High Republic era that you can read about in the comics and novels that are coming out. So not necessarily related to those characters, but this is going to probably close out that era of the Star Wars storytelling, as far as I understand. So there's some new names added to the cast. Jodie Turner Smith from a TV show called The Last Ship. I remember once I saw the pilot of The Last Ship at WonderCon. I think we were waiting for the Bob's Burgers panel or something, and they had the Last Ship panel and they showed the pilot for that. This is probably 5-6 years ago. So she was in that show, and she's going to be joining the cast of The Acolyte. And then, boy, I'm going to mangle this name. I apologize in advance. From the Squid Game. Have you watched the Squid Game? Everybody talked about that. I never saw it.
I haven't seen it either.
Okay. I feel out of the loop on the Squid Game, but
Yeah.
Lee Young Jae or Jung Jae. I apologize again. I definitely mispronounced his name, but he's also joining the cast of The Acolyte, and then Manny Jacinto from The Good Place, which I have seen part of. He's going to be on The Acolyte as well. Lastly, Charlie Barnett from Russian Doll, which is the series that The Acolyte showrunner Leslie Headland was previously the showrunner for. So following her over to The Acolyte. Very excited for this show. And you have said in the past, Rebekah, that you try not to get excited for these Star Wars series until they enter production. Does casting count? Like, it seems like this might actually happen, right?
Yeah, I still wait. I don't
Okay.
know. Because you have like after casting, you can still have like major changes in
Right.
showrunners and all kinds of
Yeah.
things. So you think it's going to have one kind of tone, and then all of a sudden somebody else comes in. So yeah, so I usually wait.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll
I'm a
get
wait till the trailer kind of gal.
when production starts, we can pretty much assume that it will eventually come out, I think. Then we had some new comic books coming from Star Wars this week. I put up reviews today of Star Wars Darth Vader number 27, which was so this is continuing the story about Sabe, the former handmaiden of Queen Amidala, is basically like teaming up with Darth Vader and Ochi of Bestoon, the Sith assassin, and they are going after Crimson Dawn, the criminal organization run by Han Solo's ex-girlfriend, Kira. And Crimson Dawn has like infiltrated the Empire. There's a lot of Imperial officers who are secret Crimson Dawn agents. And this is continuing that story of them trying to weed them out and eliminate them. And there's one particular officer that's giving them a lot of trouble. And this is kind of the culmination of that story. I'm still really enjoying this. Greg Pak is a really good a really good comic book writer in general, and also has done some great stuff with this Darth Vader comic. And then we had Hyperspace Stories #2. This is the kind of kid-friendly Star Wars comic book right now, coming from Dark Horse Comics. I liked the first issue of this last month, but this one did not really do it for me. I thought it was poorly written, but it is about Luke and Leia. It takes place between episode 4 and 5, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And it's about Luke and Leia going off and trying to find another planet that the rebellion can kind of use as not a base, but like as a little checkpoint. And it turns out that the Empire has a secret base there, so they can't use it and they have to escape, basically. I just didn't like, I thought the dialogue was clunky. The plotting just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't know. I kind of want, this is obviously a kid's more family friendly, kid friendly comic book, but I would like it to appeal to adults as well. And the last issue I thought did a better job at that. And the last comic to come out this week, came out yesterday, that I have not read or reviewed yet, was The Mandalorian #3. But I'm assuming that is just another adaptation of the 3rd episode of The Mandalorian. I've enjoyed those so far. I like the writing. The writing's obviously mostly from the show, but I also like the artwork too. So it's fun reading those stories in a different form. So you can check that out, all those out at your local comic shop. And then the last bit of news that I found on laughingplace.com for this week was a new exclusive Black Series box set, a 3-pack of 6-inch Black Series action figures from Star Wars and Hasbro, depicting the Mandalorian himself, Din Djarin, Ahsoka Tano, and little baby Grogu. Now, does this come with 2 Grogus or 1 Grogu, and they just have to share?
I think it's a 3-pack, so therefore I think they're sharing.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. It just in the photos now, because they're back side by side, looks like they both have a Grogu.
So you get a Grogu. You get a Grogu. I'm sorry.
Now these are characters that already have been made as Black Series figures. I think that cloth cape on Ahsoka is different from the individually packaged one, but I think to me that would be the only difference. But It's still a cool set. If you like that series and you like these characters, you can go and pick that up. It's an Amazon exclusive from Hasbro. There's the box, nice artwork there. And that's going to bring us to the end of Star Wars headlines for this week. Excited, Rebekah, to talk about Star Wars Andor. And if you have any comments, but by the way, from now on, spoiler alert for Star Wars Andor, if you have not seen the first 3 episodes, and we are recording this live on the Laughing Place YouTube channel. So if you are watching live, you can feel free to comment, and we will address your comments here in our discussion. So let's talk about Andor. This series got announced a few years ago as a prequel to Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So when you heard about this back then, when they first announced this, I guess you were probably skeptical that it would ever get made, right? But other than that, what were your expectations for Andor?
Okay, I did not go see Rogue One in theaters. I've seen it on an airplane because I tend to consume that kind of entertainment that is leaves me in a positive frame of mind, is very uplifting. And I wasn't sure that Rogue One would kind of put me there, knowing it's tragedy. It's success, but yet it's tragedy. And I'm still wrestling as a Star Wars fan with the dynamics of what they did to the series with the Rise of Skywalker, because I still struggle with Rogue One, right? They get the Death Star plans, then A New Hope, they destroy the Death Star. We have them destroy the Death Star, a few more times, ultimately defeating the Emperor. Oh, but wait, all these years later, they come back and they tell me, no, they didn't really defeat the emperor. It's not
Right.
like a new evil has arisen. It's the
Right.
same evil. So I don't. So I'm kind of at a loss as to how I even feel about all of it. And so that's
Sure.
kind of how I was approaching this Andor. Was it's like I'm not sure how I feel about it, and I'm interested to see if this series is able to kind of make me care more if that makes sense. Like Rise of Skywalker made me care less, and now I'm hoping that this will kind of make me care more again.
Okay. Now you said you were hesitant about Rogue One because you were afraid it was going to be kind of a downer, I guess, right? So when you watched it, did you feel that way, or did you feel like I feel like they say the word hope in that movie so many times that they kind of want you to feel that hope at the end. Did you feel that way when you finally saw it, or
It,
did you
it
feel
No,
depressed?
yes, you're right. It did overall feel more hopeful,
Yeah.
but I'm so guarded in getting invested in these characters.
Okay.
And I kind of still wrestle with that even here because it's like I can only care so much because I know you're not going to be here for much longer. So that's where I'm at. How about you, Mike? What were your thoughts when Andor popped up?
Well, I did see Rogue One in the theater a number of times, and I do think it's worth seeing in the theater. You just missed your second chance for that to happen.
I know,
Um,
right?
but yeah, I will say that I really like the character of Cassian Andor. I like, you've said you really like Diego Luna
Very much.
as a personality. And I
Mhm.
would agree with that. He's very fun to watch in those interviews, but he's also a good actor. The
Mhm.
character he inhabits is interesting and different. We saw in Rogue One how he is willing to do some bad things to further the cause of the Rebel Alliance. And this series, I think, is kind of planting the seeds for that. So I was looking forward to finding out more about how he became the person that we see at the beginning of Rogue One. And I think they are, so far in what we've seen, I think they are heading in that direction, which we'll get into a little bit more. But
Is
yeah,
my
yeah, go ahead.
Is my recollection correct that in the same way that he kind of is shockingly violent at the beginning of this film, that he is shockingly violent at the beginning of that film?
That he's shockingly violent at the beginning of Rogue One.
Rogue
Yes.
One? I
Yeah.
mean, because here it's unintentional,
Yeah.
whereas in that film, my recollection is quite intentional.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I think the argument could be made. All right. So to get into it a little bit, yeah, at the beginning of Rogue One, there's a spy who gives him some information about the Death Star, basically, and he is forced to. Well, he chooses to kill that spy, that informant, because the guy has an injured arm. He can't like climb out of this space where they are, and the stormtroopers are coming. If the guy is captured, he might give away the fact that he's given this information to the rebellion, basically. So he murders him there, and it's a choice, and it arguably is in favor, helps the rebellion with their cause. In this series, it opens with Cassian being bullied, basically. He's just looking for his sister, as far as we know, his lost sister, at the beginning of the show. And there's these two corporate security guards or police officers who pick on him in this bar slash brothel type place. And they don't want to let him, they're annoyed by him. They don't like his face, basically. And they follow him down a dark alley and try to rob him, and in self-defense he accidentally kills one of them, and then the second guy basically like pleads for his life. He's like, listen, we'll go and tell them it was an accident, we got in a fight and this guy accidentally died. And then Cassian just chooses to shoot him
Right.
in the head there, again, kind of for self-preservation. He doesn't
Right.
want to get embroiled in any kind of investigation or anything like that.
No,
Are they yeah,
even as a casual,
yeah,
that parallel
yes,
that was caught my attention.
right. Yeah, I would say the difference between the two is this feels more like self-interest, his what he's doing now in the beginning of Andor, and then later on it feels like he's doing the same thing or willing to do a similar thing in the furthering of the rebel cause.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
No, it's
Um
story arc. Mhm.
yeah,
Character arc. Totally.
yeah. And I think that is kind of what we get into when he meets the Stellan Skarsgård character, and he talks about, well, you're fighting them on a small time level, basically, and do you want to be part of something bigger and take them on for real? I think that, yeah, that's the direction that they're headed in. But yeah, in general, I was very excited for Andor. I do like Rogue One quite a bit. It's my favorite of the Disney era Star Wars films, and learning that Tony Gilroy was the showrunner for this gave me a lot of hope for it, because he's said in interviews that he was never a big Star Wars guy, which I find very interesting. Like, he didn't really grow up a Star Wars fan. He's just a filmmaker and a good writer and director. He's not necessarily a fanboy like I am, or like some of the filmmakers that they've hired are, but he's just coming from a storytelling narrative angle and a filmmaking angle, which I think is a unique take, where he's not necessarily overly reverent to
Mhm.
the Star Wars franchise, which I think it's a different way to look at it, different way to approach it, and I think it's advantageous in certain ways.
Yeah.
Um,
It it
so
was it was
yeah,
nice to watch the show and not be explaining to my husband who isn't as
yeah,
I'm a casual, he's even more casual. But it was nice. I wasn't constantly going, "Oh, that's a nod to this fan thing. That's a nod to this fan thing." Or hit pause. I need to Google because I know that means something, but
yeah.
I can't quite remember what it is. And there wasn't. I haven't got the sense that there was very much of that in this at all.
Yeah, if you go back and watch the Book of Boba Fett or even The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi and stuff, those shows are loaded with Easter eggs, references to other Star Wars stuff. This isn't really that kind of show. It definitely takes place in that universe, and there are recognizable things in it, and little hints. Like, the thing that jumped out to me that I loved was at the end of episode 3, when they escape, to jump way ahead, at the end of episode 3, when they escape on the speeder bike, and you hear that noise from Return of the Jedi. It goes like, woo, like that's the, the noise the speeder bike makes, and you're like, okay, it just kind of reminds you that we're in the Star Wars universe, but it's not necessarily like, oh, in the background you can see the bounty hunter Forlom or anything like that.
Right.
It's more like, let's zoom in on this other part of the galaxy. And people have pointed out there isn't a ton of recognizable, even like the basic recognizable stuff from Star Wars. I mean, like the blasters look like Star Wars, but the droids look different. The the villains look different. Like, they're not stormtroopers yet. I know there's going to be stormtroopers in this show, but you don't
Mhm.
see any in these first 3 episodes. The villain faction are these sec- security guards, basically like corporate police officers in these blue uniforms that we haven't seen before, and they look Star Wars. They fit into that galaxy, but they're not just more stormtroopers. I think that's very interesting, and like you said, coming at it from a casual fan, I'm sure it's more approachable for that reason. Like, you can feel like you can enter into this without needing all that foreknowledge. Would you agree with that?
I would, however, as like this is diving into kind of an aspect of what I'll just describe as science fiction that I tend to shy away from.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a few comparisons, and I'm being very, very loose with this, so don't come at me too hard. But for me, this kind of has a bit more of a like maybe a Babylon 5, a Deep Space Nine. There's maybe there's a little bit more kind of an industrial
Hmm.
or gritty
Yeah.
element to it that didn't that like I say when those shows have to work harder to get me to care about them than just like Star Trek on its face did or Star Wars on its face did. Even
Yeah.
Star Trek, like Picard has had to work harder to make me care than the original series ever did. So like I say, it's just that kind of. But on the flip side, my husband it had him like right away. He
Yeah.
is loving this. He is very much engaged with it. So Skywalking Through Neverland has come, and this is Sarah, and says loved Andor, especially episode 3. Oh, by the way, that's my next question for you: Andor or Andor? And she says it just knocked the breath out of me. The intercutting between the backstory and then bringing us to Ferrix. So that's what Sarah said. And there was a booty call. They dropped a swear word. Like very different kind of Star Wars.
It is very grown up. You said the word gritty. I think gritty is the perfect word to describe this show. It feels so much more grounded. I think is another good word. You know, there is space travel, there is aliens running around, there is droids, but it feels more realistic than something like Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think because you don't have the Jedi element, you don't have people using magic or the Force. To answer your question, I've always said Andor. I think in Rogue One they say Andor, but I think Stellan Skarsgård just says Ander. So maybe that's where you're getting that from. But it just falls into the tradition of Star Wars characters having names that can be pronounced multiple ways, like Han or Han. And I think either is probably acceptable. So you said Doobie loved, or Doobie has really liked at least the first three.
Very much.
What were your thoughts in general on the first three episodes?
I'm hesitant to
Okay.
embrace it.
Okay.
I I am so confused in some ways because they've introduced this enormous world that we haven't seen before, right? But
Mm,
I'm not exactly sure what yet I'm supposed to be invested in knowing more about, and what are they going to kind of just they're just kind of dropping because that's letting me know a little bit more about the character. So I'm kind of like the Canary for specific. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to want to know more about Canary, or am I being offered these little glimpses of Canary so I better understand Cassian? And so I'm in this weird kind of, I don't know exactly how much I'm supposed to be diving into this story you're giving. You know, I'm invested in Cassian. I really like the character of Bix very,
mm,
very much.
mm.
The droid is adorable. I hope that there's much more of the droid, even though we see Cassian leave planet at the end of this the third episode. Um, so yeah, no, I love so much about this, but
Yeah.
I am so guarded. I am like
Okay.
so it's going to take them a little bit more time to get me to more fully invest. So I'll be honest, Mike. I'm kind of at that point right now where I want to wait until the next few episodes drop and then watch them, binge watch them.
Okay.
I'm not as kind of inclined to be like jump right in and be, oh, I can't wait for next week. I feel like I
Okay.
want to wait and let them get a few and then watch them and then see if I want to continue.
Okay. Do you think it has to do with the kind of moral ambiguity that we're seeing? Because I feel like I want to talk about that a little bit as well. And we talked about it. We kind of covered it or touched upon it with the Cassian stuff. But I feel like there's stuff going on here where you can, to jump ahead again, you can kind of make the argument that there's no really good or bad side here. It's just kind of all a bunch of different players, at least so far.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, okay, so the lead, the the uptight officer, that's Karn, right?
Yes, his name is Cyril Karn. Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I refer to him as Karn. Um, I am unsure how I'm supposed to read that character.
Yeah.
In that his demeanor when he's on planet and in the moment, I'm unsure. Am I supposed to be taking his reactions as a greenhorn, or am I supposed to be taking his reactions as surprise at the lack of embrace by the locals?
I think a little bit of both, I would say, and also surprised at the lack of embrace by like his underlings.
Okay,
Um, I when I was rewatching the episodes yesterday, I called him the Dwight Schrute of
I saw that.
the Empire, and then I watched Star Wars Explained review, and he also made that comparison. And I think there's a lot of Dwight in this character. He's a very like by the book villain, and we are, I think, in any other show, in any other context, he would be a very clear villain, and he's posed as the villain of this series. But I have seen people on Twitter making the argument that Cyril Karn can be perceived as the good guy of this story because he's arguably doing everything right. His coworkers have been killed. He just wants to investigate and bring the person who killed them to justice. Right now, he's not directly tied to the Empire. Um, but he has been situated as the villain in this story only because we see Cassian as the protagonist and the hero. And like we said already, Cassian is willing to do bad things to further his either his own cause or later on the rebellion's cause. So there are some lines being very heavily blurred here, I think. And like Doobie just commented, I think for that reason, it makes Cyril Karn one of the more interesting villains to come along
Yeah.
in a long while, because yeah, there's a good argument to be made that he's not really a villain so far in the story. But I do, I do feel like if I had to predict where that character is going to go, I do feel like this is going to be a story about how somebody like him who believes he's doing the right thing can be radicalized and become something more dangerous, but I don't know, that's one of the most interesting things about the story to me so far, is that moral ambiguity that we don't see a lot of in Star Wars. Most Star Wars stories are about very clear delineations between good and evil. And do you feel that that's part of what's maybe making you hesitant to embrace the series?
Oh, well, that's interesting that you say the way that you describe it, because when I finished this set of three, I told my husband I'm unsure if this is going to be a character where we see a redemptive arc, where his reaction, his kind of the reality of being kind of boots on the ground amongst the people, doesn't open his eyes to kind of the negative realities of who the people he's working for are imposing upon society. But you have come away from him these first three episodes envisioning that he only becomes further uh, radicalized and embracing that power structure that he works for. So yeah, I guess to some extent that is playing into it, because I'm not exactly like I left it kind of unsure where they wanted me to put him, and
Right.
I guess that's what they wanted. So I
I do
I'm
I
the
do
right
think
place.
that's what they wanted. I do think Tony Gilroy is playing with our conceptions of what makes a hero and a villain, especially in Star Wars, because like I said, it's almost always pretty clear cut. And there are characters who go back and forth, Anakin Skywalker, Ben Solo, whatever, go back and forth between being good and evil, but you always know which side that they're on. And I just feel like there's so many shades of gray operating here. Like even the character of what's his name, Tim, which is not a
Mm-hmm.
very Star Wars name, but it's got
Mm-mm.
two M's, so that makes it Star Wars. Tim is Bix's boyfriend, who she works with, and seems like generally a pretty good guy, but he also turns in Cassian, who, like I said, is the protagonist of the show. The show is named after him, so we are meant to dislike him for that. But also, it's kind of the right thing to do in that moment. Maybe, I don't know. Like it, you do find I found myself questioning a lot of this stuff. Like, am I supposed to dislike him, or how am I supposed to feel about him? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Bix is on Cassian's side and trying to help him out. So I think we're supposed to be allied more on their side,
Well,
but there are shades of gray. Yeah.
and you get the clear impression that Bix and certain other people in Cassian's world are operating with a very specific belief regarding the empire, with the imperial forces, whereas you don't get the impression that she has either brought him into this mentality, or if she doesn't necessarily think he sees things that way, because clearly she hasn't been totally upfront with him regarding that kind of dynamic of her life. By the way, Sarah brings up something interesting regarding the officer we were just talking about, and that is that there's this moment where the speeder blows up, and you see security officers getting injured, maimed, and you see his reaction to this, and when people are calling in essence for the medic by yelling Bacta.
Yeah.
And this is not really something that we've seen before. It's been very, I feel like previously a lot of Star Wars characters, both on the good guy team and the bad guy team, for lack of a better way to describe it, were stoic. And that's one of the things that I have enjoyed with this series so far, is that people are far more expressive, emotionally expressive. And
Yeah.
I've enjoyed that. I look forward to that more. That's part of the reason why I enjoy Bix so much. Marva as
Yeah.
a matronly figure, her emotion, I do have very much enjoyed that.
I think the great question that gets raised by what Sarah pointed out is that, we know the Empire is bad. We've seen what they can do, what they're capable of. We know the Emperor is evil. But does that mean that anyone working for the Empire, or even this like subcategory of the Empire, deserves to be killed because they're just doing their job? It's like it is very heady stuff that you don't get asked a lot. It's like a Saving Private Ryan kind of thing, where you're like, oh, I don't know if I want these Germans necessarily to get killed, but they're fighting for the Nazis. Like, they're just human beings.
Mhm.
Um, so it's tough to say, but I do think it raises a lot of interesting questions. If I could go back and just give my kind of general response to these episodes, so I got to see the first four, actually the first four episodes of Andor like a month and a half ago for the press junket, and I wasn't allowed to talk about them for a long time. And I've been waiting and waiting because there was so much to say about Andor. And I was very surprised when we first watched them because I was caught completely off guard. The only stuff that we had really been shown so far was a lot of like action shots. I feel like the trailers are so action heavy, and I feel like
Mhm.
somebody coming into this show having only seen the trailers would be taken aback, I think, by the tone of the show, which is very it's almost quiet in a lot you don't think of Star Wars as quiet, but it takes its time. It's a lot of conversations, a lot of people talking to each other in rooms, and the conversations are allowed to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I compared it to like a prestige TV drama like Mad Men or Deadwood, these shows that I loved in the golden age of television in the last 20 years or so. And I think it does fit into that category, just happens to take place in the Star Wars galaxy. And I think that's a really interesting marriage of these two kind of contrasting styles. But in my review, I said, I found it very odd the way that these episodes were broken up initially, because when I first saw these episodes, we were still under the impression that they would be released one at a time each week. And if you had just released that first episode, I don't think anyone would have been satisfied. I think in my head, I almost picture that these three episodes were written as one kind of like mini movie. And then somebody made the decision, like, we can break these up into 40-minute episodes and release them one at a time. But I don't think there's a satisfying ending in episode 1 or 2 that makes those episodes work individual. I don't know. Would you agree with that? Like, if you had just watched episode 1, how would you feel about this?
Oh, no, if I'd have watched episode 1 and then
Yeah.
episode 2 the following week, I would have been like, "Hmm."
Yeah.
Because usually when you have a serial, even though you have this overarching, storyline within each package, right? You have kind of something that's wrapped up with a bit of a bow, each week. And I'm hard pressed to come up with kind of
Yeah.
like you're talking about where does episode 1 kind of what is that bow on episode 1 and then episode 2,
Yeah.
we have it with episode 3. And
Right.
so I think like you say, I'm very wise decision to drop it because I don't know if they would have held me until week 3. I don't know if I would have given them that much grace to keep me until
Yeah,
week
that's why I kept saying, like, I mean, once they announced that they were releasing all three at the same time, it made perfect sense to me. And then even next week, because I've seen 4 already, get ready to feel that way again, because it has this weird like non-ending. I'm not spoiling anything except to say that. But yeah, I do think my theory is that this season of Andor was written as maybe 4 little mini movies, and they got split up into 12 total episodes, which I think is as an odd choice. I do really like the show other than that, but I would be very curious to know the decision making process that went into that. Maybe they just
Oh,
didn't feel like that would work as well for subscriptions, or keep people's tuning back in week after week or whatever. But That's my theory about that this was meant to be little individual movies instead of these shorter episodes. But
So
let's
you're confirming my gut that said I want to wait and then binge it
yeah
into little pieces. Okay.
yeah
Good to
you
know.
might be onto something
Good
there.
to know.
Let's talk about the plot. Well, oh no, I actually want to touch on something else before we move along.
Okay.
Is the look of the show, because I do think they also made a conscious decision to avoid using the volume that they used for the Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Boba Fett, and they built this giant city set for the planet Ferrix, and I think it helps kind of opening up the world, and it gives it a different look and a more grounded look. Obviously, there's a lot of CGI enhancements going on in the background, and then when you have like wider shots of spaceships taking off, it's all computer generated. But when you're in that town, it definitely feels like those environments are all very real around them, and it lends a believability to that world, I would say. And then I think just the cinematography and the tone set by the look and the lighting of the show is all really working in its favor. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
I agree, and I would add to that the
Yeah.
music. The
Right.
music is very different. It's not kind of that melodious, I'm gonna put it on in the background as I'm doing something in the same way. It's much more there. And I was surprised as part of the Disney Plus Day thing, they said Diego Luna gave the impression that they were actually playing that music on set, so that when he was walking through this, that music was setting the tone even there, as they were in production. So I found that very interesting, and that choice has been one of the things that has made it the most stark for me as far as like a Star Wars experience. And I
Right.
was going to point this out too, that as skywalking, as Sarah says, the citizens of Ferrix have these warm, earthy tones, these mustard yellows, these tans, these earthy colors. And then you have the security unit, the pre-morph security unit. They've got those blues. So you can have that visual contrast right there. We also have a little bit of that even when we're on Kenari with the children, much more kind of inspired by earthen tones, whereas the people on board ship, have that more typical grays and whites within their
Yellow skin for some
Oh
reason.
yeah. Oh, from the yellow smoke.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's from this. I didn't even put that together that was from being gassed. I thought they just had yellow skin because they were weird aliens.
I presumed it was because we saw that yellow smoke kind of.
Okay, you're probably right. You're probably right. My
So.
brain went to, oh, it's an alien race with yellow
Oh,
skin.
I have more to talk about on that when we get there. So
Okay, well let's get into the plot of Andor. So we talked about him getting in the fight with the two security guards and killing them both, and that's basically the inciting incident, as you would say in screenwriting, and that gets the ball rolling on this whole story because he is looking for his sister, and he returns back to where he lives, the planet of Ferrix, which is like an industrial planet. And he I guess he works in a mine, is that, or he was working in those like shipyards, the junkyards, and what did it look like they were doing on this planet? They're like taking apart ships or rebuilding
yeah,
them.
that's how it looks to me. That they're salvaging
Yeah,
equipment off of ships that are no
right.
longer flight worthy, and
Yeah,
so they take the innards and use them for other purposes.
right. So on this planet, Cassian has his adoptive mother, whose name is Marva, Maarva. She's basically going to be his his closest ally, his most protective ally, I should say. But there's also Bix, who is, I believe it's implied that they were once together and now are no longer together, but they're still friends and allies. And they're not necessarily what I would call rebels fighting against the Empire, but they are outlaws, I guess, and um, kind of smugglers, selling these illicit goods that they've stolen from the Empire to a contact in the Rebel Alliance that we'll get to in a bit. There's also a droid named B2 Emo, which is very funny. um, who speaks he actually speaks basic or English, as you would call it here. What did you think of B2 as in the way that he speaks?
He reminded me even more of Vincent from Black Hole
Okay.
with that little
Right.
stutter and kind of barely on the edge of operating. I enjoyed that a lot.
And then we mentioned Bix's boyfriend Tim, and then Cassian has another friend named Brasso, and I kept thinking of Only Murders in the Building, which I think Brazo or something was the name of Steve Martin's character on
Very
the TV
similar,
show.
very
Yeah.
similar name. Yeah.
Uh, but Brasso is basically another friend who helps him out, who lies for him and covers his trail when these officers come looking for them. On Okay, then there's the maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but this Cyril Karn works for this corporation. He's how would you describe him? He's by the book. He's tailored his suit to fit him better, his uniform to fit him better. He lacks confidence in his superiors, because his superior is like, yeah, forget about it. Those guys had it coming. Like they got in their own trouble and they got killed for it. Just keep your head down and keep doing your job. And this guy Cyril Karn is like, no, they got murdered. I'm going to take it upon myself to kind of go over your head and hunt down, try to figure out who committed this crime and hunt him down, take him into custody. And then underneath him is a very fun character named Sergeant Kotsek. He's like the only person who respects Cyril Karn. So I really found this character to be very entertaining. And he's just kind of a yes man and trying to like boost Cyril's confidence. When he gives this speech and they're leaving on that shuttle to go to Ferrix, he gives this big inspirational speech and nobody responds. And then Kotsek starts applauding, and
Yeah.
everybody like hesitantly goes along with him. So yeah, very much a Dwight Schrute type character, this Cyril Karn, getting no respect from anyone around him, his underlings or his superiors. But he is intent on bringing Cassian to justice. And then the last major character that we haven't really talked about in these first 3 episodes is Luthen Rail, played by Stellan Skarsgård, a very accomplished actor who Disney fans will know from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But here he's basically like a rebel recruiter who has heard about Cassian's misadventures and his ability to steal stuff from the Empire and wants to enlist him in the larger fight against the Empire. What do you think of this character?
This was the character that kept my attention.
Yeah.
To be honest, when he was on screen, the screen had my full attention. Other characters, to here and there, yeah, a bit, but for whatever reason, whenever this man was on screen and engaged, especially with Cassian Andor, there was a dynamic there. I wanted to know more. When he wasn't on screen, I was wishing he was on screen. I am very eager to know more about how he ended up where he is, because we've got a little bit of a taste of how Cassian's kind of, the path that Cassian's been on, but this man is an enigma. We don't really know why, kind of what his story is. I'm hoping we'll learn more about it.
Yeah.
And just learn more about what his position is within the kind of anti-establishment dynamic, because I'm very excited about that whole design.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. I think between Luthen Rail and the villain that I'm very, very interested in, because he could, he has a lot of potential to be unique, I would say, Cyril Karn. Those 2 characters are my favorites among the newbies. But the other supporting cast members are all very good as well, so I'm into that. And obviously these episodes end with Cassian going off with Luthen Rail, agreeing to follow his cause, or at least figure out what's going on there, and also in an effort to escape this corporation who fails pretty spectacularly in their attempt to take him into custody. And there's really only one big action scene in all of these 3 episodes. It's that big battle at the end, which I think is very well staged and again very grounded. You can always tell what's happening where. Pretty exciting action scene, I thought, that escape from Ferrix. So let's talk a little bit about the interstitials between all of this happening, which is the flashbacks that we get to the planet Canary. How did you feel overall about this kind of stuff?
I love this backstory. I love the
Yeah.
idea. Okay, so this is what I'm coming to it with. That Canary was a mining community. It was a mining planet, that there was some sort of disaster that obliterated the adult population. You end up with these children now kind of orphaned by this mining incident, and the Imperial have abandoned it because of the toxic nature of whatever it was that happened at this mining incident.
Hmm.
I found it interesting in that the name of the planet is Canary, and I don't know if I'm supposed to draw this conclusion, but to me, it's very close to canary.
Yeah.
We always talk about it, but the canary in the coal mine,
Right.
and I kind of find it a bit interesting. It's in some ways that this whole storyline is a bit of a canary in the coal mine as far as the overall power structure being undermined. And there's an element of that kind of here as well, where there's these little pockets fomenting, as the ballyhoo guy talks about, whose name is escaping me. I think of him as Scottish. The Scottish gentleman who
uh,
points out that.
Kotsek is his name.
Yeah,
I
he
think. Yeah.
points out that, and I felt that there was, it's at this moment in time. I feel like this is what's going to be part of what when Castian says, "I've been fighting it since I was 6." I feel
Yeah.
like, to some, I think we're supposed to take from it that somehow the Imperial forces, come into play with that. And so that's part of what has him anti-establishment. And then he
Yeah.
slowly has become more and more active in that.
So let me tell you my read, because I think
Okay.
your interpretation of these flashbacks is interesting and different from mine. Um, so when I first saw these episodes back at the beginning of August, I saw the young Cassian, who I think is called Casa, was his name when he was a child.
Yeah, Casa.
Um, and I thought back to that line from Rogue One where he says, "I've been fighting this fight since I was 6 years old." And I thought, well, that kid doesn't look like he's 6 years old to me, right? He looks more like he's like 10, right?
Right.
Would you say?
Yeah, no,
Um,
totally agree.
so I thought, well, maybe they just felt like, oh, you can't cast a 6-year-old in this role. He wouldn't, I don't know. But then I was thinking about it a little bit more when I rewatched it, and I was thinking about how they keep talking about how there was this mining accident on this planet, and your interpretation was that the mining accident has killed all the adults, which I hadn't even thought about. I was like, yeah, what's this like Lord of the Flies like type civilization that they have here where there's no adults around? I do think we're going to learn more about that, but my guess as to the little bit of backstory that we haven't seen is that there was the Empire did come to Canary and start mining, and maybe had enslaved all the adults in the mines, but that the children had like fought back and become warriors, and that would have happened when Cassian was 6 years old. So that's why he says he was 6 when he begun this fight and took out the Empire there. Maybe the adults all died in that battle, I don't know. Your idea that they were poisoned by whatever accident, or maybe that factors into it as well. Either way, I do think we'll learn more about Canary as the show goes on. But yeah, I was intrigued by that more so the second time when I was watching this, trying to figure out how all those pieces fit together. But regardless, the flashbacks end with what's her name, Marva, finding Cassian, or Casa as he was called, in that ship, crash ship.
Before you get to kind of where those conclude,
Yeah.
Sarah pointed out something with skywalking that I didn't catch on my first watch,
Yeah.
but the second watch I caught, and I think it was a brilliant thought. And that is how much the moment that was shared there kind of helped shape Cassian, because when we meet him, he is very much kind of take the moment. I mean, he doesn't even want to abandon the box that he has stolen, even
Right.
though everything in your mind would tell you, just save your skin.
Yeah.
But he's on that. And there's a moment in this where he is seemingly kind of brought along on the adventure for the first time. is the impression I got. It's like the older children are heading out to investigate this crash, and he goes along with them. And you get the impression that he hasn't necessarily been kind of graduated to that point within the hierarchy of the children's society. And he sees that the leader is in danger because he sees this adult, the guy who was off the ship. He sees him begin to stir, and he can see that she's in danger, but he doesn't speak up, right?
Right.
And then even after she's shot, all the children rush to her aid, and he still seems kind of paralyzed with fear, with indecision. And then shortly after that, we see him and he clenches his fist, and then he goes into the ship. And it feels like kind of a very character defining moment, that this was a moment in time that his indecision, his fear kept him from making a choice. And you get the impression that that is going to be something that he pushes against from that point forward. And I think that's part of what shapes him. And it was something that moment was lost on me. But when Sarah brought it up, I'm like, oh, totally. That's like a specific moment of definition.
Yeah, that's a really good point, a really good observation. The other question I have about the flashbacks that I think does matter in the long run is when exactly is this happening? Because you figure Cassian in the present of the show is maybe 25 years old. And if the if it's 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, which, oh, by the way, I wanted to point out, I think this is the first time it's ever been used like in story. Is it says 5 BBY at the beginning of the episode, at the beginning of the series. So yeah, before the Battle of Yavin, that was for a very long time used as the timeline for Star Wars fans and the historians and people writing reference books to use as the indicator for when something took place. But is this flashback happening after the Empire took over for the Republic? Because I think somebody called that ship a Republic ship having crashed, right?
Right.
So maybe
Yeah.
the Empire doesn't even exist yet.
You're right.
So I think I even said it was, they would have attacked the Empire, but maybe it was the Republic who had come there and was mining. But I think it is important that we delineate the difference between those two, again, because it paints those shades of gray. Like even the Republic was doing things that weren't necessarily great. They were invading these planets and taking their resources and stuff like that. So yeah, very, very interesting to see. I hope we do get more of those flashbacks in the future and learn more about Kenari and the backstory there. But as of the end of the episode, he leaves with his adoptive parents and goes off to become the Cassian that we see in the present.
Marva and Clem.
Yeah.
By the way, Clem, once
Clem.
again, not a very Star Wars name to me, Clem. But
right.
I'm glad, but Clem.
Fair enough. And I think we don't really know exactly what happened to Clem, but I believe that Luthen says that he was executed, by the Empire. Yeah.
And my understanding is that's a reference that has been made previously in books. In like a Rogue One guide makes references to Cassian's family, I guess, and so that has now been canonized within the dialogue of this episode.
I did not know that. The other thing that we have to keep in mind as this goes along is there's a comic book, kind of a one-shot comic book called, I think, Cassian and K2SO, which is about how they met. I only read it once back when it came out around the same time as Rogue One. But I have to wonder like how much of that is going to remain canon and how much is going to be changed as they go through, because I assume, since he said, Tony Gilroy has said this series is going to end like the day before Rogue One starts or something, K2SO has to show up at some point, right? They have to get to know each other before that story.
So it's a very interesting story. You have this young boy named Casa who is on this planet that has suffered this tragedy.
Yeah.
He has a sister. In this moment of time, he is saved by Marva and Clem, who seem to be scavengers from Ferrix. They seem to go around from planet to planet gathering items. That seems to be what we're to gather at this point, based upon the story. And they take him away to safety, but they've now separated him from his sister.
Right.
And when we encounter him at the beginning of the show, he's searching for his sister, but we don't know, is that a quest he's been on continually, or is this a
Right.
more recent quest? I'm intrigued by that. I also love the notion that part of this scavenger kind of living on the edge dynamic is partly from his family. This adoptive family would have, kind of brought him into that scavenging, salvaging parts, family business that kind of was on the edges. So, yeah, it's I'm intrigued to see where we go with his story. Does he
Me
find his
too.
sister?
Me too. And to me, the highlights of Andor so far are the characters, the tone of the show, which I think is really right up my alley. I also, like Doobie, like when things are brought down to a more grounded level. And I've seen people complaining already that this show is darker and dealing with more moral ambiguity than George Lucas wanted Star Wars to be. That's probably true. But I do think there's room for this kind of storytelling in Star Wars as well. If you don't like that kind of storytelling, there's so much other Star Wars content that is brighter and happier and has those clear delineations between good and evil, and stuff that's aimed at kids. There's plenty of stuff aimed at children, like that comic we talked about earlier, happening in Star Wars right now, animated series and stuff like that. So I think there's room for a show that's aimed at adult fans of drama in Star Wars too, which I think leads me to kind of my wrap up question. Do you think that Star Wars works as a drama this way, as a drama targeted at older fans?
I I would, yes. Most of the people I know have represent that. I mean, I have not encountered anyone yet who doesn't like it as much as I didn't. Everybody else is very much, but that's because it's not that I don't think it's a well made and produced show. It's just it's not my taste.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a well made, and I think, like Sarah says, definitely yes. I'm
Yeah.
editing, definitely yes. Um,
Fair
and
enough.
but
Oh,
but
it's
I'm
to
but I wouldn't want it to
yeah.
be the only offering within this world. And
No,
so
no, not at all.
that's what I'm thankful that we are in a time where there
Yeah.
is this wide variety.
Yeah, there is a wide
Something for
variety.
everybody, as Drew says. Drew says something for everybody.
Exactly. Oh boy, yeah. I am so happy that we live in this almost kind of a Star Wars renaissance. And I know some people would disagree with that for sure. But we do live in this period where everybody is getting something. Yeah. And you can pick and choose. If there's parts of it you don't like, you don't have to consume it. And if there's parts you do like, you're more than willing to be happy about it, enjoy it. As I consume almost all of it. And there's some of it that I haven't loved and some of it I really loved. And I think this is going to be a big part of that.
Do
Um,
you do you
yeah.
think that this is a possible entry point for people who previously have not consumed Star Wars? And by that I mean they've watched it and they've been like, that is so not for me. Or do you think it's still Star Wars enough that even that, it's not likely to pull in very many new people to the concept of Star Wars?
I think I will never get to a point where if somebody asks me where should I start with Star Wars, I'm not going to say the first
Okay.
Star Wars movie that ever came out is the best place to start because it has all the elements, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. It has all the elements that we're talking about. It's fun for kids, it's fun for adults. It has the smuggler scoundrel character with the blaster. It has the Jedi with the Force and the lightsaber. It has everything. It has the aliens. It has the Empire. Everything is there in the original Star Wars film. That's the place everybody should start, I would say. But then if you find yourself more interested in the war side of it, go toward Rogue One and Andor, and I think you're going to find a lot to love there. If you love the Jedi side of it, there's the prequels and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. You can go off in any of those different directions and explore all these different aspects, but I love all of it. I love everything that was in that original movie, so I like seeing them splinter that off and explore all these different avenues. Does that make sense?
Yes. So let me change the
Yeah,
question just a little bit.
sure.
Can you envision a time where you will be at Star Wars Celebration and you'll be talking to the Star Wars geek alongside you? Be like, so what was your first Star Wars experience? And they're going to be like, oh, Disney Plus that Andor series, I was in right away, and then from there, then I went and watched A and B and C and D.
It's a good question. I don't know. I could see that happening with The Mandalorian more than Andor, because
Okay.
The Mandalorian is like this almost generation defining Star Wars, like more than the sequel trilogy, I would say. The Mandalorian has been everywhere because of Grogu and
True,
the
very true.
merchandising blitz that came out of that. And I think kids growing up now are going to see Grogu and say, well, I knew Grogu as a toy first, as a plush stuffed animal, and I went and saw The Mandalorian. I fell in love with that, and that was the doorway to get me
Okay.
into more Star Wars. Starting with Andor, maybe you're gonna find, like a somebody who's older who never got into Star Wars before and likes war movies or like more bleak like spy thrillers and
See,
started
'cause
watching Andor. Yeah,
well, because I'm thinking of honestly my husband. If I met my husband now, and I know his likes and dislikes, and I
yeah,
knew he hadn't seen anything Star Wars, I think I might be like, oh, well, we should watch Rogue One together. We should
yeah.
watch Andor together. I don't think I would go, yeah, A New Hope. That is how I'm going to get you to appreciate George Lucas and the world that he created in the way I do. I think that I would use these as kind of that conduit. Sarah says Star Wars Rebels is a good place for kids as well. And yeah, so no, it's just one of those things where it still amazes me, how like my youngest brother, he talks about, for him the prequels are,
Yeah.
his heart and soul. That he talks about them the way I talk about A New Hope. And so it's just interesting to me the notion that there may be some people who, for them, this is what kind of opens their eyes to the universe of Star Wars. And it's just a very different entry, a very different entry point, extremely different entry point.
It is extremely different, and I could see people watching this show first, if in the unlikely event that you haven't seen any Star Wars before and you come to this first, you would be thrown if you went and then looked at other Star Wars stuff, you would be thrown by the tonal
Mhm.
shift. At the very least, this is like totally different from anything that's come before, tonally, at the very least, from Star Wars content prior to this. Is there anything else that we want to talk about with these first 3 episodes that we haven't covered already?
Let me see. I'm looking at what little notes I've written down.
Okay.
I'm hoping for more BMO. No, I think we've pretty well covered the highlights for me, and just how different this series is. It's very different to have a series with this moral ambiguity. It's
Yeah.
it's very different because I like you say, I get the impression they kind of want me to like the bad, who I consider the bad guy, and I push back against that. And the lack of fan service, that's taking a bit of getting used to, where I'm not kind
Right.
of, looking in the background as much as the foreground. So yeah,
Yeah. So you said you're looking forward to seeing more of the
I am.
droid, but we also haven't met like Mon Mothma yet in these first 3 episodes. You're looking forward to seeing more of her. I know like uh Saw Gerrera is gonna pop up.
I'm excited for Saw Gerrera. I
Yeah,
I am take it or leave it regarding Mon Mothma, but I have a suspicion that this will series will make me much more interested in her as a figure.
yeah,
She has not ever been, for me, a particularly inviting character that I've been, wow, I want to know more about her.
right.
So I'm interested to see if they do that. I'm hoping we will learn more about, since we from everything I know, we know that his father was hung. I am hoping we learn more about that, because that feels like it would be a very defining moment within
Yeah.
Cassian's storyline. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that. Drew says he's hoping to see more of the moral quandaries that Cassian had in Rogue One, and he likes seeing a more practical rebel who knows that eggs need to be broken from time to time. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. As for myself, definitely looking forward to following the path of that character Cyril Karn, who is posed as the villain so far. I think we both have different predictions as to where he's going to go. So, curious to see how that shapes up. I've only seen 1 episode from here, and there's not a whole lot to say as far as he goes and his path, but there is more coming up that we'll talk about next week. And other than that, I'm just very optimistic about this series and looking forward to seeing how it shapes up as a whole. Anything else you want to say about the future of Andor? Does that mean
I,
you're not going to want to come back next week?
no, 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 no.
Okay.
I don't hate
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I'm
No, I know, but
enjoying
you
it.
you said you want to wait
Oh,
and
no, no,
binge all
no.
of it. So I'm
I
wondering, like, do we want
I
to
have
get
a
a different?
responsibility. I have a
Okay.
responsibility. I'm used to that. I've been doing this entertainment writing thing for a few
Okay.
decades now. I'm used
Yeah.
to not being able to consume media at my pace anymore. But no, the one thing I would really like to see is I would like to see Bix, a
Yeah.
much more fleshed out character. I feel that, with the loss of Cara Dune in Mandalorian, we lost a tremendous female character within the
Yeah.
Star Wars universe. And then I don't think Fennec Shand was ever explored to the extent I hoped, or utilized in the extent that I hoped within the Star Wars universe. And
Right.
I have that feeling about Bix, and so I'm hopeful that we'll get to see her more, and even his mother in these flashbacks.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to see her more, because I enjoy having these female characters be more dimensional,
Right.
and more engaged in it, because that was one of the things I like about Princess Leia in the original series. To me, she
Yeah.
was like this, as I've told you, that Star Wars got me the moment she kicked open the door and grabbed the rifle. That was like, I'm here, you've got me, I'm 100% in on this series.
Well, I'm
So
hoping for the same thing with Mon Mothma, because that character has always kind of been one note. But I would call
mhm.
her, like, she's almost kind of like a Boba Fett, where it's more about how she looks than any depth to that character. She just looks very regal and like a leader, but we don't know much more about her than that.
Very
I mean,
true.
in the books, novels have gone into her a little bit more, but in live action, we definitely haven't fleshed out that character very much. So I'm looking forward to diving into getting into Mon Mothma's brain a little bit and her motivations and stuff. So I'm sure that's coming up very soon. Um, and yeah, excited for more Andor. And I think that's going to bring us to the end of our discussion of these first 3 episodes and to our final segment of Who's the Boss. It's called First Steps into a Larger World, where we talk about the media that we've been consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars. I have a great one to talk about this week. It's called Return to Monkey Island. It's a computer game slash, well, now I got it on Nintendo Switch, but these were computer games when I was growing up, the Monkey Island series. I had them on PC as a teenager and loved all of them. This is, I think, the 6th overall entry in the series. There hasn't been one for a long while. And the original developer of the games has come back to do this new one. I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm not terribly far into the game. I haven't had a lot of time, but it just came out this week. Check it out. It's called Return to Monkey Island. It's available on Nintendo Switch. I think this is actually a good place to jump into this series, because it kind of brings it back to the roots of Monkey Island, and you kind of start off in a similar place to where the first game started off. It's a lot of fun. It's very funny. It's a point and click adventure game with a pirate theme. So there you go. Return to Monkey Island. How about you, Rebecca?
I will throw in The Patient on Hulu, because that is one
Oh
of the
yeah.
shows that right now I eagerly await its arrival each week. It is very compelling, extremely dark, so not at all the typical Rebecca consumption.
This is with
Um,
Steve Carell
yes,
and
it is with
and
Steve Carell.
and Hux, right? Domhnall Gleeson.
I believe so, but
Yeah,
I know for sure Steve Carell.
yeah,
And yeah, he plays a therapist who is kidnapped by his patient. His
yeah.
patient has a compulsion for murder, and he believes by kidnapping the therapist that the therapist can help cure him of this compulsion. And so there's this very much edge on your seat uh, story, the dynamic there, and everybody within the story is very compelling. And you have this kind of backstory with the therapist himself, some family troubles that he's had, and you kind of deal with those a bit in flashback too, because obviously as a prisoner, he has lots of time to think. So you get to, kind of see him working through some of the things that he's dealt with, as he's waiting for this guy to. So it's like I say, it's one of those just most of the action happens within the small room that he has trapped Steve Carell. And and a lot of it is just the dialogue between Carell and his captor. So it's very, very, very well done. And like I say, not at all. Yes, Drew, you are correct. It is a horrific version of What About Bob.
I love it.
So true.
I was thinking Misery, the Stephen King story, but yeah, that makes sense. What About Bob? But like the thriller version of What About Bob.
Yeah,
I love it.
no.
Yeah, The Patient has been on my list. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I do really want to check that out. So thank you for that recommendation. And I want to thank you for joining me as my guest slash the running the background stuff here as we
You're very
dive
welcome.
into Andor for the next however many weeks this is going to be. Thank you, Rebekah.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Sure. And next week, right here, back here, I think probably around the same time, we're going to be talking about Andor episode 4 coming out on Disney Plus next week. As always, visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions and lots of Star Wars stuff over there. And follow Laughing Place on Twitter, and also follow Who's the Bossk on Twitter at Who's the Bossk Pod on Twitter. And my name is Mike Celestino. I want to thank you, everybody out there who watched this live on the Laughing Place YouTube channel, and anybody out there listening to the podcast version later on. Thanks so much. See you next time. Thanks again. Bye.